his lips and is a fool. Also, it is not good for a soul to be without knowledge, and he sins who hastens with his feet. The foolishness of a man who twists his way, and his heart frets against the Lord. Wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his friend. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies will not escape. Many entreat the favor of the nobility, and every man is a friend to one who gives gifts. All the brothers of the poor hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He may pursue them with words, yet they abandon him. He who gets wisdom loves his own soul. Who keeps understanding will find good. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies shall perish. Luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant to rule over princes. The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. The king's wrath is like the roaring of a lion, but his favor is like the dew on the grass. A foolish son is the ruin of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dripping. Houses and riches are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. He who keeps the commandment keeps his soul, but he is careless of his ways will die. He who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. Chasten your soul where there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. A man of great wrath will suffer punishment, for if you rescue him, you will have to do it again. Listen to counsel and receive instruction, that you may be wise in your latter days. There are many plans in a man's heart, nevertheless the Lord's counsel that will stand. What is desired in a man is kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. The fear of the Lord leads to life, and he who has it will abide in satisfaction. He will not be visited with evil. A lazy man buries his hand in the bowl, and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. Strike a scoffer, and the simple will become wary. Rebuke one who has understanding, and he will discern knowledge. He who mistreats his father and chases away his mother is a son who causes shame and brings reproach. Cease listening to instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. A disreputable witness scorns justice, and the mouth of the wicked devours iniquity. Judgments are prepared for scoffers, and beatings for the backs of fools. Was that it? Oh.
You are amazing. You can be the first one to eat. I'll make sure they save you a special plate. What was your name? Oh, just Albert's plate. All right, so I read it, and honestly, I was so confused. So, the first thing I did was Google Proverbs 19, like shortcut, like summaries, notes. Yeah, I'm being serious, because I didn't know what was going on. Anyways, but I wrote down some notes after I read what other people said, because it made more sense. I needed it to be like dumbed down to me, because I don't know if you guys know, but if you actually understood that, congratulations, I didn't. So it goes on to say that Proverbs states that it's better to be poor and have integrity than to be a fool. So one of the aspects of being a fool is desiring things without having any knowledge. It's like for absolutely no reason you want the random things, because you just follow your nose. It's like, that cartoon, like whenever they smell something and it's good and that's it. They've lost all integrity, all knowledge of anything that's going on around them, and they just want whatever their desires. That's it. They're just fulfilling their flesh. All right, that's one of the main things that they speak about, and they go on about this in the last Proverbs, the one that I was meant to do, but I called in sick, and the one before that. And they have a lot. So even though we have free will to do whatever we want, whenever we want, but you need to remember that the next time something doesn't go your way, don't blame God for it, because you're following your own desires. You're not following God's. And that's the one, like the main thing really, at the beginning of Proverbs. And then it goes on to say, and this one like really honestly got to me, where it says, wealth earns friends, whether real or fake, it's debatable, but poverty makes people dislike you or stay away. So there was a verse in there somewhere. Our wealth makes many friends, verse 4, but the poor is separated from his friend. And I thought, as if, because like if I was rich and people were coming to be my friend, Like, I'd feel lonely in a way because I know for a fact they're not really wanting me for me. But if you think about it, it says, it realized that the rich or the poor aren't the issue, but it's you that's the issue. So it's not the money. Sorry. It's you. So you're going to love anyone that has money and has the ability to spend that money freely, specifically on you. Okay? So it's not going to be like, oh, they're going to buy me a car, they're going to buy me a house, nothing ridiculous like that. But it's just like, for example, it's your birthday, you're going to like think, I know for a fact this friend is loaded. I wonder what they're going to get me as a gift. Okay? It's just mainly to benefit you. And it says, you don't mind because that money is like for you in a way. You don't love that person, you love what they have or what they can possibly give you. And that's the reason why you generally won't be mates with someone that doesn't have as much money, because there's nothing you can really gain from them, like in any way. And if you notice, the people that have less money or less, material objects or whatever it is that you want to call it, like rich in any sort of way, they're kind of labeled as difficult people, or they're labeled as like people that have troubles all the time and you don't really want to be around them. And the reason you have this mentality is because you love yourself and you're the only one here and you're only there for your benefit. So whatever is going to benefit you. And if you do anything, like after listening to me ramble on right now, just reevaluate your circle, reevaluate like your circle of friends and consider it for a second, because like it really hit me deep. Not that I care in any way about money or whatever, but I've realized that you can see sometimes people that are like that. Like they don't have specific people around them, or they value other people over other certain kinds of people simply because they want to further themselves. Because that whole thing like, oh, show me who your friends are, like whatever, and I'll tell you who you are. I don't know, some rubbish like that. But basically, it's not real rubbish because some of it is in the Bible. But you know what I mean. You know what I'm trying to say. Thanks. Anyways, and then there was like one of the other verses, and it says, lazy is the man that like, the person that's lazy like puts his hand in a bowl and then doesn't even bother to pick it up and like reach out of it. Like it's at the, like somewhere in the middle, if you want to go to it. But it says, it's kind of funny when you think about it, because it says lazy people are so lazy that they'll stick their hands in a dish and won't even have the willpower to take it out. So imagine you're sitting with a mate and then they come grab a cracker and then they put it in like hummus or something and then they don't take it out. They just leave it there. How stupid does that look? How dumb is that? All right, because you need to be fed initially. Anyways, that's like the main thing. But it sounds vague at first, but this one saint specifically says it can lead to lying and a bigger sin. And this is actually really good. He says, the one who sins in word is one who, for example, when out of laziness, he has not gotten up for the service. Doesn't say, forgive me, I was too lazy to get up. Like they weren't even that honest. But then they come up with a excuse. So they'll be like, I had a fever. I had too much work. I hadn't have the strength to get up. Like I was sick. I had a headache, whatever. And then says 10 false statements in defense of their behavior. They'll be like, no, this is the reason why I didn't do this, or this is why I couldn't do it. And start to believe the lie. But it says, rather, make a single prostration and be humbled. And honestly, think about it. Isn't that easier? Like, just get up, get down, say, sorry, I was lazy, and saying 10 false things, all right, and adding more sin to your neck, and then maybe to other people's. And if you think about it, like one prostration, forgive me, I was lazy, and enter heaven, or 10 things and make it worse and like snowball of sin, and then go to hell. That was pretty much it. Thanks for listening. I'm done. Mark, come here.
Thank you, Natalie. Such a very insightful pre-talk today on Proverbs chapter 19. So to move on, we have our Bible study today, which is on Exodus chapter 17 by Father Paul. Abuna just walked out, so what we might do is have a bit of a pause and ask Natalie some questions. So who has questions for Natalie? Mary, was that your hand being raised? No? Anyone have any questions? For you? Yeah, okay. So in that verse, the verse where they condemn the lazy person or the person who goes for rich friends or whatever, are you saying that that's directed at us or other people? No, but is it directed? So for example, when I'm reading the Bible, do I read it and just say, oh yeah, this is for other people about me, or how do I look at it? So you're saying I should look at it as myself? So how can we benefit from it? What's our take-home message? What's one positive thing we can do? Okay. So are you saying I judge people by saying they're poor? I judge someone. I say, oh, this person's poor. I'm going to be their friend. Is that what it means? So you're saying it's not money. It's about what you benefit. Here we go. So does it have to be just like physical money or like gifts and stuff, or is it just like, for example, um, this person does me favors, they look after me, so that's why I'm their friend? Is it just money? Okay, all right, and so we'll get started with the Bible study. So whenever Buna is ready, we'll get started. Thanks, guys. You need a PowerPoint. Do you have PowerPoint? I'm gonna send it to you. Try and figure it out. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Do you guys mind coming closer, please? Normally we're in the Arabic church and it's more cozy, and this is like not cozy at all. So right all the way to the front. Yeah, all of them. Yeah, you can skip the first one. David, Philip, you guys too. David, can you just see if there's a Bible on the back table and bring me a Bible if you have one? No Bible? That's all right. No. Mark, if you give me a Bible from in the altar. All right. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So it's good to see you all. We're doing Exodus chapter 17 today. All right. So can anyone tell me what's happened?
Then the Lord said to Moses, Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called its name, The Lord is my banner. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Okay, so I started the chapter by saying, I would like you to tell me where in this chapter is Christ, or where would the fathers see Christ in this chapter? Does anyone know? Go. The word, the name Joshua is the same as Jesus, and he does become a Jesus figure in other occasions, but not in this particular chapter. Where is Christ in this chapter? I want to bring lollies to, give you guys some incentive, like kids. Yeah, Dave. Okay, good. Justify your answer. Good, you are correct. Where do we get that from? There's a very explicit answer to that one. But yes, that's the right one. What's the next? Where's Christ in another part of the chapter? And we'll go through that in a minute. Good. Justify your answer. Good. Yeah, very good. So they're the two. So I might stop. And this one, I'll try this one. Or the white. All right. So we get the slides back up. Okay, so next slide. So now that we've read the first chapter, we're going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1 to 5. So it's from the New Testament. This is from St. Paul. What verses did I have up there? I can't remember. 1 to 5. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all of our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea. So he's commenting on Exodus here. Okay? All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Okay? So when I ask, where do we get it from? Where do we get the concept from? We're not just developing the concept our own selves spiritually. The New Testament writers themselves, St. Paul says, that rock was Christ. Okay? So that's how we see Christ in the Old Testament. In this particular chapter. So the story goes, and I'll give you a couple of contemplations about the rock. The story goes that they want water, they cry out and whinge and whine, and God says to Moses, go, take the stick and strike the rock. And when he goes to strike the rock, it says, "Behold, I will stand before you on the rock." Okay? So God, or the God of the Old Testament, is standing on the rock to be struck to satisfy the people. Okay? And so the symbol there is that Christ is crucified to give us life-giving water. That's the symbol there. That's the meaning behind that passage. And that's why St. Paul says Christ was the rock. And there is really no satisfaction or joy or happiness unless you behave or act or are as you were created by God to be. There is no way to be satisfied unless Christ is the one to satisfy you. No matter how much you search for, unless Christ is the rock, unless Christ is the one that gives you the drink, there is no satisfaction. Later on, they cry again about water a few chapters later. Does anyone remember the story? They cry again, and does anyone know what happens? Anyone can fill in the details? They want water again. What happens the second time? You? That's right. So the second time they cry out for water, God says to Moses, "Go and speak to the rock, and the rock will give them water." And what did Moses do instead of speaking to the rock? Struck it twice. Bang, bang. And did water come out? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. But Moses was punished for that. What was Moses' punishment? Yeah, exactly. He was not allowed into the promised land. It's very harsh. It seems very harsh. And I heard a contemplation about that. That if the rock was Christ, then and the striking of the rock is symbolic of the crucifixion, then Christ is not to be crucified twice. That's what I heard about that contemplation. And whether Moses understood that or didn't understand that, maybe that's not really the answer. But God says to him, "You didn't hallow me in the name of the people," and therefore he didn't obey God, and he was not allowed in. Also, Moses represents the law, and the law doesn't give salvation. So that's the other reason why. Okay, so there's just a couple of quick contemplations about the rock. Yeah. That's up to God. I couldn't answer that question. God is merciful and gentle, and all the analogies and the symbols that we have, we can't fully extrapolate into the life of Christ. We can, but we can't draw our own conclusions based on that. But we don't know. Yeah. So Moses was punished, okay, and he wasn't allowed to enter into the promised land. But does he enter the promised land? When? There's a better example of him being in there in a promised land. Listen to your mom. What did she say? Yeah, what happened? Yeah. And then? And who was there? And Moses. Yeah. So in the Transfiguration, right, on the Transfiguration event in the New Testament, there appears with Christ Moses and Elijah. And so even though Moses wasn't, and by the way, this is not what this chapter is about, we're going on a tangent here, but Moses is in the promised land. And so as if God is giving him the chance to be in the promised land, but he didn't allow him in this. The main contemplation is that it's because he symbolized the law. And at the same time, Moses had such a dignified status with God. Moses had such a close relationship to God. He saw God almost face to face. He shouldn't be disobeying God. He had such a dignity in front of God. So I guess he was held to a higher standard. But at the same time, God was also gentle on him. He did let him see the promised land from a distance, and he was in the promised land with Christ on the mountain of transfiguration. So what hope do we have? We have hope. Are any other questions? Yeah. The promised land was Canaan. They're in the desert now. That's in Canaan. Oh, that's in Jerusalem, like that what they considered at the time to be the promised land. So they're now wandering around in Egypt. We should put a map up. So they're wandering around in Egypt, right, in the desert of Egypt. Promised land is this little slither of land here. Okay, that includes Jerusalem, Judea, Galilee, all that region, the Gaza, all that region. And so they're trying to get here, but they just walk around in circles for 40 years. Eventually, they do make it in. And then Jesus, when he's transfigured, is in this little strip of land. Okay. All right, let's move on. Next slide. So it's small writing, but I hope you guys can read the slides. But the first spiritual lesson I wanted to think about with this chapter, I said that as soon as all these miracles happened, as soon as they escaped the Egyptians, great miracles happened, then the first thing they did was whinge and whine, and they started to murmur, okay? And I wanted to take the lesson, and I think the speaker last week touched on this topic of self-victimization or feeling sorry for ourselves. And in this case, God listened. They had a reason to complain. They had a reason to complain. They were thirsty. There was no water. Without water, they would have died. Okay? And they complained, and God didn't rebuke them yet. Okay? But you have to be very careful about victimizing yourself. Self-victimization. Okay? It's a trap that sometimes we fall into. The worst thing, for example, in married life is for a husband or a wife to feel like they're not being dealt with right persistently. Because it makes the home impossible. Okay? And it makes the other partner, it's impossible for them to manage this person who's always a victim. And so we have to be very careful of this mindset of self-victimization. Okay? It's very destructive for you and for the people around you. Okay? Because even if you have reason you are a victim, you're being dealt with badly, you have a bad hand. Okay? These people didn't have water. Even if you do, for you to fall into a negative mindset in that way, traps you in that. And you don't come out of it, and you damage the people around you. Okay? You have to be very careful of. And what happens is you end up making much bigger mistakes. Okay? You end up treating other people badly. You end up complaining, not being thankful. You know, these people were not thankful. It is much better for you to be thankful and positive, especially recognizing the good that God has done for you. So even though you have things in your life that perhaps there's reason to complain about, it's better to focus on the things that are going well in your life and thank God for them, because you're often wrong about the fact that you're a victim. Here, the people are not victims. They are not, but they're talking as though they are. Did God bring us here to let us die? And they repeat that expression over and over and over again until God gets fed up with them. And he says, let them live out here and die. Let them go round and round in circles. I've done this and I've done this and I've done this for them, and they will not thank me. Okay? Remember that God is well aware of your troubles. You don't need to whinge and whine about them. Okay? You don't need to victimize yourself. As I said, God answered this time, but later on, he's very harsh with them. When they enter into the promised land and they see that the giants, the big people, and they get too scared to fight, God is harsh. God has had enough of their whinging, and if you don't trust me, then you can stay in the desert for 40 years. Okay? So be careful of that mindset of self-victimizing. Okay? It's a very toxic mindset. You're much better off being thankful, polite to God, and God is aware of your trouble, and he will resolve your problems. He was going to give them water. Surely he was not going to let them die of thirst in the desert after all that he did for them. They should see that, and we should recognize that God is always there. The next lesson about the thirst. Yeah, could you zoom in again like you did in the last one? This is a contemplation from one of the fathers. He says that, what do we thirst for? When we come to talk to God and we come to ask him for things, what are we thirsting for? In life, you always thirst for something. In this case, the Israelites thirsted for physical things. They wanted physical water. And this father, he rebukes them and thinks to himself, they should have been thirsting for something much bigger. When you thirst for something much bigger, you work for that thing. But when you thirst for something physical, you work for something physical. You get something physical, and then there's no satisfaction after that. So Caesarius of Isles, he says, perhaps this word that he said may seem superfluous, that the people thirsted for water. So he's saying that, of course, if they're thirsty for water. What else are they thirsty for? For since he said, in their thirst, what need was there to add for water? Thus indeed the ancient translation has it. Why did he add this except because they thirsted for water when they should have thirsted for justice? Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for justice. And again, thirst is my soul for the living God. Many people are thirsty, both the just and sinners. The former thirst after justice, the latter after dissipation. The just are thirsty for God, sinners for gold. For this reason, the people thirsted after water when they should have thirsted after justice. We tend to dedicate ourselves and be passionate about the things that we thirst for. If what you want in life is physical and material, you will thirst for it, you will work for it. Sometimes you will achieve it, and you will still be dissatisfied. You will consistently be dissatisfied. But if you thirst for something higher, God will resolve your physical problems, and He'll give you that higher thing, and you will be satisfied. If you thirst for virtue, you will have virtue. You will work for virtue. Like, for example, you really want to love. You do things in your life to love other people. You sacrifice for that purpose. You act as though you love other people, and you will eventually start to love other people, and you have that virtue, and God will then resolve all your other physical needs. You'll have the rest of your physical needs. So we ask ourselves today, what do we thirst for? Do you thirst for spiritual things, or do you thirst for physical things? And if the answer is physical, I think most of us, unfortunately, it's physical, then we try and reconfigure that mindset. Next slide. The other lesson we want to take away from Moses in this passage is that Moses here, they're crying and whinging at him as though he's the one that can resolve the problem. And Moses, he carries the burden of the people. Okay, he constantly carries the burdens of the people. And we as well, one of the virtues I was just talking about, what do we thirst for, is to carry the burdens of others, not make the burdens of others harder. St. Jerome says, when Moses was being stoned by the people, he made intercession for them even more, so he wished to be blotted out of God's book sooner than that the flock committed to him should perish. He sought to imitate the shepherd who would, he knew, carry on his shoulders even the wandering sheep. So Moses, he's saying that Moses constantly carried the burdens of the people. Every time they needed something, he carried the burden. He worked for them. He prayed for them. He suffered with them. The next chapter, he judges them. He gets so tired that Jethro gives him advice and says, start passing out the responsibility. So he carries the burdens of the people around him. The last lesson from these first 7 verses, which is the striking of the rock, is that God's solutions always come in unexpected ways, always much better than your solutions to anything that you will try and resolve. Okay? Any issue you have in your life, God's solution is always a better solution. So St. Ambrose says that the rock is not meant to bring water. There's nothing in the nature of a rock to suggest that water should come from it. Okay? But in this case, water does come from the rock. So he says, the people of the fathers thirsted. Moses touched the rock, and water flowed out of the rock. Did not grace work as a result contrary to nature, so that the rock poured forth water, which by nature it did not contain? So he's saying that that God's solutions sometimes are not the very natural, logical solutions. He has his own solutions to your problems. Trust in God, and He will provide those solutions. And sometimes, even in your own life, you have to go against your own nature. So my nature dictates to me, for example, that my nature dictates sexual desire. That's part of my nature, right? And The world is now telling us that what's wrong with acting on your nature? Act, go, doesn't matter. The world is doing it. But sometimes to be God's, to be part of God's solution, you must work against your own nature. Okay? You must be ascetic, for example. That is against your nature. To sleep on, I met a guy in Africa. I was telling my kids this story recently. That he was thinking about serving God, and he wanted to serve God. And he opened up the Psalm. I can't remember which Psalm it is. It's in the 3rd hour, I think. And it said, the earth is the Lord's and all that dwells therein. And he read this concept that everything is God's. Everyone, not just Egypt, everyone. He was in Egypt. And he just said, everything is God's. And he disappeared to Africa. And he went to Tanzania. And I met him in Tanzania. And I asked him, what led you here? And he said, I opened up that Psalm and it said, the earth is God's. So I came to, and that's it. I'm not going back. And I'm going to serve God the rest of my life. And I walked past his room one night, and I found that he didn't sleep on the bed. I found his bed set up on the floor, verses all over the room. Every night he'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, sing tasbihah. And I said, that's not natural, but that's spiritual. And sometimes it goes against what is natural. And we are called sometimes to go against our nature for the sake of God, to be part of the ways of God. Does anyone have any questions on the first 7 verses? Okay, about the rock that was struck and water came out of the rock. Good. Okay, so the second half of the chapter. So 8 to 16. So we'll just read it again, the story. And then we'll contemplate a little bit on this part of the story, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he had let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called its name, The Lord is my banner. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. So, the context of this story is that previously, Amalek, the nation that they're fighting with now, this is the first war that the Israelites fight once they've escaped Egypt. Okay, and these people, Amalek, did not give passage to Israel to the promised land. They didn't let them through. Okay, so God has them wiped out. Okay, because they blocked the people of God entering into the promised land. And this promised land is obviously symbolic of heaven. The people of God is us. And so we have to be very careful of blocking people from what is good. Okay? When Jesus rebukes the Pharisees, okay, he rebukes them for hypocrisy, and he rebukes them for blocking people from heaven. He says to them, you hypocrites, you block them from heaven, you carry not one burden with them, and you yourselves are not entering. And so we have to be very careful, especially when it comes to service, but in anything we do. And by the way, you may be the only symbol of Christ someone in your workplace ever meets. And all they see in you is a selfish human being. So you are somehow blocking them from what is good. You have to understand that that's a reality that we face. And if I am not careful about my hypocrisy, then the feeling of God to me is I need to be wiped out. Because what does God want? Except that those people in my workplace know Him. And if I'm going to be a hindrance to that, then I have to be careful. And so think about the way you behave in your service, in your families, at home, anger, jealousy, selfishness, money hungry, that way of dealing. Even if it's business, in business, I'm a businessman. At church, I'm a churchman, but in business, I'm a businessman. That psychology makes me be wiped out, in front of the eyes of God. And I have to be very careful of blocking people from what is good. And so God is very harsh on the Amalekites because they did not let the promised people enter the promised land. So be careful of your behavior in all settings, because you may be the source of salvation for people, but you can also be, unfortunately, the source of blockage. And if you're the source of blockage, God has no choice but to remove you. Okay? So just be careful of that. Now I want us to think about a little bit the next slide, the power of prayer. Moses didn't know what to do in this setting. Okay, he didn't know how to defeat the people. The people were scared. So what's Moses' solution to the problem? It's to pray. It's to pray. Never forget to pray about your problems. Never forget, especially when you don't know what to do. When you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and you don't know how to make a decision, and you don't know what to do in a setting, and you're faced with two wrongs, always pray. Bend your knees, lift your arms, and pray. Because God will find a solution for you, and there is great power in it, especially when you're lost and you don't know what to do. Don't ever forget to pray. Gregory of Nazianzus says this: "For my own warfare, however, I am at a loss what course to pursue, what alliance, what word of wisdom, what grace to devise, with what panoply to arm myself against the wiles of the wicked one." What Moses did is to conquer him by stretching out his hands upon the mount, in order that the cross thus typified and prefigured may prevail. It's an invitation to God is to pray. It's an invitation. So many times we have problems that we don't know how to resolve, and we do not pray. People come to us as priests, and they tell us the problem, they want an answer, and we say, "Have you prayed?" They say, "I prayed." Like once, or you prayed? You have to pray. You want a solution to your problems, you must bend your knees, you must hold your hands up, you must pray. Moses didn't pray for a second. He stood up and he prayed until the problem was resolved. And he found a way to make sure that he could continue praying until his problem was resolved. Do not stop praying. Do not underestimate the power of your prayer. Okay? There is a lot of power in praying. That is where God is invited, and that's where God answers, and that's where God provides solutions. Okay? It's in your prayer. So you must have a personal spiritual life where you pray. The other thing, next slide, is never underestimate the work that you do. Okay? When you read this story, the whole thing is about Moses. Moses lifted up his hands, and there's two guys standing next to him that aren't acknowledged. Who are they? So they took, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. Okay? And so Father Tadros Malachi comments on Hur, one of the two. It says, look at the value of this servant. This person standing there who is unacknowledged, is unseen, he's just empowering Moses. But there's so much value in his service. In everything you do, take it seriously. Never do any form of service for God or any task in this church or outside the church not half-hearted. Don't do anything half-hearted in your life, because you never know the value of that thing that you're doing. Okay? So Father Tadros Malachi says about Hur was not as great as Moses, yet it would have been impossible for Moses to remain stretching his hands without the help of Aaron and Hur. By this, every believer should realize his status within the divine work and should not underestimate his possibilities, even if they appear worthless. So every little task you do, especially in the service of the church, has great value in front of God, and God will bless it, and God will use it for his kingdom. So do not underestimate it and never do it half-hearted. I remember once our confession father was telling us, he said that if you do a service half-hearted, lackluster, don't do it properly, he says, be careful of what I said before about blocking the people entering into the promised land, because you're taking the place of someone who would do it properly. If my job is to cook food and I don't do it with love, someone else could do it with love, or clean the bathrooms, or teach Sunday school, or to do youth meeting, or give a talk. Someone else could do it with love, and therefore God could be in it, but because you don't, God is not there. Okay? And you have to be careful of that. So never underestimate anything that you do. Never put yourself down, never put any task that you do in life down. It all has value. God can use everything and anything, and He does. He uses everything and every person with all their skill and talent and lack of skill and lack of talent. He uses everything. Never be downhearted and never think it's nothing that I do. Next slide. Always be firm and persist in your spiritual challenge. I said that Moses kept praying until the problem was resolved. He insisted that his hands were up. His hands were tired. He couldn't be bothered. They found a solution. They put a stone underneath him. They got two people to hold his arms up. Find a solution for your spiritual problems. Too many times we give up on the Bible reading or praying or serving or attending church because for practical reasons. Too tired on a Sunday, I wake up every other day early. Bible, I don't have time during the day, I get too tired at night. I get too tired to pray. I don't have time in the morning. 1,000 practical reasons why I don't do my spiritual tasks properly. But you see here that they found a solution. Find a solution. Resolve your problem. Figure it out like you do with everything else in your life. Figure it out and make sure you do your spiritual tasks with persistence, and be dynamic if you must be dynamic. Be clever. Find different ways of doing it. When I used to study, I used to get so bored of my study space that I took my dad's office for a while. I said, Dad, see you later. I took his office. And I took my brother's room for a while. And then I found another place in the house. And I just rotated myself to make sure that I could keep studying. You don't excuse it, I'm bored. No, find a solution to your problem. Okay? Be dynamic in your spiritual life. The final lesson, which we started with, was the cross. So I just want to read this last bit of the chapter again. And Moses built an altar. So after the problem was resolved, Moses built an altar, verse 15 and 16. And Moses built an altar and called its name, "The Lord is my banner." So there's a name there for God. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And so the final lesson is the power of the cross in your life. And it is the symbol that you live by. It is your identity. Okay? And it's not, having the cross as my identity is not, we get the cross tattooed on my wrist or on my shoulder or on my back and I say, I'm a Christian. I put the little cross in my car, on the window. I'm a Christian. No, it's what the cross represents. That's what you live by. That's your banner. That's your belonging. That means God is my banner. That's what he said. The Lord is my banner. It's meant to be, when we call God that, when he says that in the Old Testament, it's meant to be an understanding that you are God's, that he's your father, you are his son, you belong to him, and you live by that thing that is the cross. The sacrifice, the obedience, the humility, living by Christ, that's what it means. It has no value that I have a cross tattooed on me. That has zero value. Having a cross around your neck, having a cross in your car, that all has zero spiritual value. Unfortunately, I wish it did. Wish that could get me into heaven. I'd tattoo my whole body. It does not. What does is that I live by that tattoo. I'm not saying I'm not going to talk about that. But I'm not saying having a cross around your neck is wrong. It's not necessarily wrong. But it is hypocrisy to have a cross around your neck and to live in anger or disobedience or in pride. That's hypocrisy. And you have to be careful of that. So when we say the Lord is my banner, it's a name, it's a title for God. He's meant to be your banner. And what is that banner? It's the cross. It's the cross. So Justin Marty says, in truth, it was not because Moses prayed that his people were victorious, but because while the name of Jesus was at the battlefront, Moses formed the sign of the cross. Who among you does not know that prayer is the most pleasing thing to God, which is uttered with lamentation and tears? But on this occasion, Moses, or any after him, did not pray in such a manner. He was seated on a stone, and I have shown that even the stone is symbolical of Christ. So in this case, even though Moses was sitting down, but because the cross was called upon, they won. They won. There is so much power in the cross. And it's not just the physical cross. It's not just, all right, there is power in that. But it's only power if it's invoked when I think about who is behind the cross and what he did to make this a symbol of glory. It's not a symbol of glory just to be powerful and aggressive. No, it's a symbol of glory because it represents humility, sacrifice. It represents following the person who is on the cross. And if we do that, then the cross around my neck is not a sign of hypocrisy. It's actually something real. And it does have great power. You know, just like the name of Christ has great power to be invoked. You know, the fathers have always taught that there is great power for anyone to invoke the name of Christ or to invoke the sign of the cross. But only, of course, if I'm invoking who is behind the cross. Not just, it's just a physical symbol that I'm proud of. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Any questions or comments that people would like to add or subtract or... Thank you. Yeah, man. Look, that's why we have the Agbeya. You know, so the question is it complaining if I pray about my problems? And that's why I always say to people that if you use the Agbeya for your prayer, it balances your prayer. Okay, because we as humans, we tend to be unbalanced. We whinge a lot, we whine a lot, we only ask about our problems. But we're actually meant to be thankful, you know, and that's how the Agbeya prayer starts, by thanks. And then it goes into asking for forgiveness. And then we go into a few Psalms to contemplate and praise God. And then you feel free to then air your problems. But balance your prayer. Balance it, even when talking to God. Think about anyone that you deal with in life. If you only ever talk to them when you're negative, complaints, problems, well, the relationship becomes very unpleasant. But my relationship to God should be something far more positive than that, you know, and it should be far broader than just my problems. There's something much bigger going on when we talk to God that sometimes I think we don't recognize and we miss it. There is no problem in telling God your problems. It's okay. But there's so much more to my relationship to God, with God. Thanks for listening, guys. Glory be to God forever.
Thank you very much, Buna. Very beautiful talk on Exodus chapter 17. So to finish off the night, we have a couple of announcements. The first announcement is the Friday the 30th. We have a special Friday night youth meeting. So that's not this Friday, the Friday after that. We do have a very special Friday night youth planned. So if you guys are not doing anything, I mean, you should book it in your calendar from now. It's going to be very fun. There will be, how many teams? 5 teams of how many people? 5 people. So it'll be 5 teams of 5 people. So you have to get in quickly. Are we announcing what it is? Not yet? Okay, so stay tuned. Maybe it will be released this Friday, what's happening. So make sure you guys come. Book it in your calendar. That's what's happening at 8 o'clock sharp, Friday the 30th.